In middle school, students began building an understanding of how variables, expressions, equations, and inequalities could be used to represent quantities and relationships. Prior to engaging in Unit 1, students need to be able to solve linear equations using a general strategy, classify equations, identify points on a graph. In this unit, students will learn about using variables, expressions, and equations to model relationships. They will learn to represent constraints using expressions, equations, and inequalities. Students will also learn to transform one equation into an equivalent equation. They will learn how the form and parts of linear equations are related to the features of its graph. The unit closes with students writing and solving direct variations. This expands their understanding of linear equations and makes a connection to their understanding of proportional reasoning from middle school. Let's take a look at the vertical alignment for applying multiple representations for foundations of functions in 2D and 2B. In preparation for writing and solving direct variation problems in Algebra 1, students began as early as 5th grade to differentiate between additive and multiplicative relationships using multiple representations. In 7th grade, they determined the constant of proportionality to prepare to solve direct variation problems in 8th grade. When students got to 8th grade, they used tables and graphs to represent linear proportions and solve direct variation problems. This prepared them to write and solve equations with direct variation in Algebra 1. When we look at Standard 2B in Algebra 1, students will need to write linear equations in slope-intercept, standard, and point-slope forms. They prepared for this starting in 6th grade by identifying independent and dependent variables. In 7th grade, they represented linear relationships using tables, graphs, and equations to simplify the slope-intercept form of y equals m times x plus b. This was expanded in 8th grade to include non-proportional situations where the intercept did not equal 0. The vertical alignment for representing linear relationships 2C, 2E, 2F, and 2G is shown. Students in 6th grade used the table to write an equation to represent the relationship between independent and dependent quantities. This expanded in 8th grade when students wrote equations in slope-intercept form to model linear relationships represented in multiple formats. These skills prepare students in Algebra 1 to be able to write two-variable equations from different sources. The equations they write in Algebra 1 are no longer restricted only to slope-intercept form. The next 3 Algebra 1 standards are clustered together as they help students build skills in writing different types of equations. In 6th grade, students began to represent situations using multiple formats, including linear equations. Then, in 8th grade, they distinguished between proportional and non-proportional situations using multiple formats, including equations. This prepared Algebra 1 students in Unit 1 to write linear equations given points and certain characteristics, such as being parallel or perpendicular to another line. Now, let's investigate the vertical alignment for representing slope in 3A, 3B, and 3C. In 7th grade, students calculated unit rates from rates given in mathematical and real-world problems, which helps build for both determining slopes and graphing on coordinate planes. In 8th grade, students began to understand slope as a rate of the change in y values compared to x values. This prepared students in Algebra 1 to determine the slope of a line given a table, 2 points, or the equation of a line. Using data from a table or graph, 8th grade students determined the slope and y-intercept. This leads to graphing linear functions in Algebra 1, including the key features of x and y-intercepts, zeros, and slope. A key expectation in all mathematics classrooms, beginning in grade 5, is the ability to represent and solve equations. In Algebra 1, the expectation is defined by 5a and 5c. Students in 5th grade began by representing and solving multi-step problems using a variable. This progressed from 6th through 8th grade as students modeled and solved equations and inequalities with increasing difficulty. This leads to Algebra 1, where students will solve still more complex problems, including those that have variables on both sides and require the use of the distributive property. Once students solve equations or inequalities, they are expected to represent those solutions visually. In grades 6 and 7, students represented the solution of equations and inequalities on number lines with increasing difficulty in 7th grade. This leads to Algebra 1, where students will utilize their mastery of 5c to solve systems of linear equations with two variables and represent them using multiple formats. As you move through this first unit and find students who have gaps in their understanding of the prerequisite skills, there are many resources available in the OpenStax Pre-Algebra book.